Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to ask you about courses, for example, curriculum itself. For example, we had a visit from the undergraduate dean at MIT who came several years ago, and he talked about courses. The course knowledge that is taught in the third and fourth year has a half-life. That means the amount of information that changed over half of the life of that course is about 7 years, right? So professors are constantly having to update their courses. Now, whether you do this online or traditional way, you still have to update the material. So is it, is that an advantage or a disadvantage by going online? Once you get it online, you just, the amount of time you have to put in, is it more or less the same?
I think it's more or less the same. I do think it's important. You know, there are some fields, I think calculus is still much like Newton or Leibniz did it, but in engineering fields or science fields, things do change quickly, and so I think you do need to do it. This, by the way, is why I think research universities have a great advantage, because a faculty member can bring that new information into the class. And a standard way to do it is what Professor Gronsky just talked about. You create a problem set around a new technology, and then it evolves, it refines, and after 4 or 5 or 6 years, you create a new problem set around a new technology. But I think our experience is that the amount of effort required to update a course is the same whether it's online or it's done the traditional way.
Same here. No further comment. I think we must freshen up these courses. I would argue that the half-life is probably shorter than that these days. It's getting shorter. You know, it's the information age, right? The only way to look at it is that it is getting shorter. And we have to put the effort into it, and whether it's done online or in the traditional classroom, it still must be done.
So one of the things that was already discussed in the presentation is the competency-based student learning. Or, for example, if you have the online course, then you can actually monitor what the student is learning. Did they master the question set? Did they get it right before coming to class? So is there any negative aspects of going online in that regards? It seems you put some of the student comments up there, and they were, Chancellor Gronsky, you put some of the student comments up there, and they're very positive. Is there any downside of this? One of the reasons why I'm asking is because assessment traditionally is often done at the end of the semester, and I think last night at dinner you also mentioned something about after 5 weeks you can do a flag system and you can find out who's participating or not, and then you can go in and contact the student. Would you care to comment on that?
So let me maybe just make 2 or 3 comments. The competency-based assessment, I think, is really valuable for many reasons. So here's the first one. I suspect it's true here, and I know it's true at Berkeley. If we have an upper-level class, we may say a prerequisite for that class is you have to do some lower-level class. Before you can take a more advanced class, you have to pass some other class. The problem we have is if a student gets a C in that lower-level class, does that mean they know everything in that class reasonably well? Or maybe they got an A on part of the class and an F on the part of the class that really matters to my upper level class. So having a finer grain of measuring competency, I think, can be a really valuable thing, because it lets you say, here's what I want the student to demonstrate they can do. If they can demonstrate that, then they should be able to move straightforwardly to this next class. I think the example you raise, I would simply repeat to people very, very briefly, but I want to tell you a quick story about why we think the competency-based way of assessing it and the immediate feedback is so valuable. There's a class at MIT. It's required of all of our undergraduates. It's a class in chemistry. Every student has to take this class. In the traditional way of teaching it, at the end of the 5th week of the term, we will have an instructor assess how many students are in danger of failing this class. It's to give feedback to them. Out of a class of 500, normally there will be about 50 such 5th week flags, 50 students who will be marked. They won't all fail, but they're not doing well. You're giving them feedback. When you go to immediate feedback. When you go to, a student can try something multiple times. What we found last year is last fall, we taught that class on campus. Professor gave the lectures, but everything else was online. All the problems were online, the immediate feedback. We went from 50 students with a flag to 3. It's one data point. We need to do it again. But to me, it said that's one of the great things about measuring that competency. The other piece about competency-based assessment is you can also fine-tune it for different specialties. So if you want to measure students' competency in calculus or differential equations, but they want to go on and do something in aeronautical engineering or mechanical engineering or in physics, the competency you're looking for may be slightly different in terms of what are the things that matter most. And having something that measures that online lets you measure that fine-grained competency, I think, in a much more effective manner than you would otherwise.
Well put. You asked about the negative effects, though, Jeff, and I have one comment that I have some experience with, and perhaps it's not really a problem, or maybe it could be better controlled. It has more to do with damaging the self-esteem of those very, very bright students who got entry to programs at schools like ours, who were then, on the basis of a competency assessment, told, you're not as smart as you think you are. And this can sometimes damage a student in the earliest phases. So it would be very important that we design this type of question appropriately so as not to damage their self-esteem, help them to understand where they might be having difficulties, and focus their efforts so that they really can, because they can overcome these problems. We know that they can, but sometimes we put them in an emotional state where they're just not quite ready to do it. So this is part of why we want to work with groups who have this type of experience, even the psychology of how these sorts of questions should be phrased, and how is it that then we can take advantage of this knowledge to assist our students. And maybe just on the positive side, one quick example. I teach a large undergraduate class, Introduction to Materials for all engineers. My colleague in the chemistry department teaches the introductory chemistry class that all engineers have to take. We teamed up one year. She gave me the first question on her midterm exam in chemistry to put on my midterm exam in my class. Same question. And she's very good at assessment. She knew exactly how all 300 students in her class performed on that question. So I was able to track how well all 300 students did in my class on the same question. What might you guess? The mean was exactly the same, and the standard deviation actually grew. Yeah. So this online, this would not have been an issue. We could have tracked this immediately. We would have known. But we had to do this grand experiment, and it took 2 faculty members hours and hours to do this type of tracking. So I think on the positive side, you see, this would be done in an instant with a proper online tool.
Yeah, that's great. That should be the best part of the competence-based assessment. But we don't have these experiences so far. But we like to introduce these kind of systems into a new curriculum. So I just really want to have this competency definition uniformly to the different courses. I mean, should be designed carefully and fairly, and in the same level throughout the university. That's the only thing I can think of at this moment. Yeah. Thank you very much for your experience.
I would add, I forgot you asked me for negatives, Jeff, so I mean, to me, I think competency-based assessment is a really good thing. I agree about the confidence issue, which is really important. The other worry I have, it's not a big worry, but the worry I have about going to competence-based assessment is that we might accidentally drive our curriculum towards things for which we can easily measure competence. So mastery of a technique, mastery of a method are easy things to check. But broader issues like insight or deeper thinking may be harder, and the danger if you go too far to competency is that you will push your curriculum towards things you can measure, and you don't want to lose the other pieces along the way. So that's a danger, I think, in this.
So in Chancellor Grimson, you showed I think a slide on kind of an active learning classroom, right? How many of those types of facilities do you have on your campus, and are you moving in the direction to create more of those? I imagine that's one issue as well, is you need the resources to pay for that transformation. So would you care to comment on that?
I will, and I'm going to give you 3 examples, and if you've been listening, you realize I always give you 3 examples. I make up 2 if I can't remember them all, so I got to stop telling jokes too. Thank you. We have begun to redo many of our classrooms. So what I showed was an example. We call it teal, which is a particular style of teaching where there really isn't a lecture hall. It's a big open space with tables, students work together. We've built 3 of those, and we will probably build some more as we do it. It does take some effort, but if you're going to redo a classroom, you think about how do you want to do this properly. So our experience is we have been building them. The second thing I would say, though, is we've also been experimenting with what I think people would call an academic village. And so the idea of an academic village is when you have a set of classrooms, you put them in a common space, but you put other things around them. So we have one in one of our major buildings where we have 5 classrooms. We also have a Starbucks, a coffee shop, we have a cafeteria, we have a gym, and we have lots of open spaces with tables. And the idea is that a student doesn't just come and go to lecture and then go away. They go to lecture, they go outside, they sit down with their friends, they start working on a problem set together, they get a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, they have lunch, but they build things that create this idea of actually creating a village where you do multiple things together. That, I think, helps tremendously with things like communication, teamwork, problem solving. These are really great things that you can do. The last one is we've been shifting more of our education into the labs. So, for example, this course I mentioned, this really large course, we will do away with lectures next year. And all of the interaction will be in a lab setting, a laboratory setting, where the students are doing things, in this case with mobile robots. And that's nice because that lab can be reused for other things. So you're really now not having a classroom and a separate lab. You're putting everything in one setting.
I would just add, if you're having difficulty setting up these spaces, Berkeley was able to find some special space in the downtown city area where we established something called the Sky Deck. And it is a playground for entrepreneurial type students who want to develop their ideas. There's plenty of rollout space. They have a lot of room. We prefer Pete's Coffee in the Bay Area, and it's right there next door. So it's a similar model, but because we are physically impacted on the Berkeley campus right now, and it would be costly for us to renovate the existing structures, we went literally off campus, but close by. And the students love this because it's easily accessed by the Bay Area Rapid Transit train. They don't have to worry about parking. They can bring their bicycles right into the building. So there are a lot of ways of finding clever solutions, even if you don't have the funding to upgrade your current classroom space.
About the question of how many facilities or classroom we have at the Tokyo Tech, probably the Dean Kishimoto gives a better answer. Is that right? Yeah. Could you help me?
Yes. How many? Actually, the upper 100 were more.